Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Cam. For this episode, my interview guest is the Director of Anthologies and Publications at SOOPmedia, and he is the author of a novel, Cast Iron, a short story collection, an unfinished coloring book, and a nonfiction book, America's Lost Generation. His name is Cameron Cowan, and my interview with Cameron will follow the note-taking sounds. Cameron Cowan, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You are the Director of Anthologies and Publications at Something or Other Publishing, which is also called SOOPmedia. What services does Something or Other Publishing provide?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. So we are kind of in a little bit of transition right now. So we have been Something or Other Publishing, and we've published a lot of books and all this type of thing. We are currently in transition to SOOPmedia, where we're kind of moving in more of a platform building direction as sort of a soup, pun intended, to nuts solution from your first article all the way to your Amazon best-selling book in your subject area. So, it's we primarily offer publishing in three ways. One is our simple voting model, which is gathering 2,500 votes and going through our author certification process to get your book published. The next one is the premium version, which is a paid membership on top of that cuts the requirements in half and gets it done faster. And then kind of our most expensive option, which is our hybrid program, where if your project meets our standards and we think that it's a good project to take on, we basically publish alongside you. You get developmental editing and line editing, which you pay for. We come along with production and 50% of the marketing and produce your book. Our first hybrid client just had his book out in March, About Not Losing, by Dr. James Augsbury, about his medical malpractice trial in the early 90s. That's kind of where we've been in the past. Our bread and butter is in book marketing and platform building for authors. And so as we've gotten more sophisticated with our platform building, we've now started to kind of move in the direction of having that as our main thing as a part of SOOPmedia. So
you've written, I looked on your website, I saw 3 books on there, so I have a question about each of them. Your nonfiction book is titled America's Lost Generation. Without spoiling too much about that book, what is it about?
Yes, it is. It will be out this summer. My first nonfiction book was called What the Hell is Going On? A Primer to Our World in the Age of Trump. It's out of print. I withdrew it from production last year. And it was a collection of essays from CameronJournal.com. You can still read them in my What the Hell is Going On collection at the Cameron Journal. But my next nonfiction book, America's Lost Generation, tells the story of millennials, people born between 1980 and 1996, through the lens of what happened in Japan in 1991 in their property crisis, and comparing and contrasting what happened to our Japanese cousins versus what happened to millennials, and telling the story of unemployment, underemployment, and economic struggle, dating struggle, cultural struggle that's been the millennial experience since 2008. And it features not only real research from researchers and thinkers and all this sort of thing, but it also includes real stories from the Lost Generation subreddit on reddit.com.
And I am roughly in the middle of the millennial generation. I was born maybe a little bit into the second half of the millennial generation, but I'm not really a young millennial per se.
Well, I mean, we're talking 1981 to 1996. I was born in 88. My birthday is actually this Saturday, the 26th of April. So I'm what we consider mid cohort. The millennials haven't been the young kids in a while. The youngest millennial is now 34. The oldest are 45. So we're talking about ordinary adults. A lot of people think, oh, millennials, young kids. That hasn't been true in about a decade. We're really talking about normal, ordinary adults with houses, apartments, kids, cars, bills to pay, taxes due. I say because I got a tax bill this year. Taxes due, all this everything. We're talking about people, real adult people with real adult problems. We're living because of economic decisions made in 2000, in the years before 2008, and in the years after 2008. Millennials have been handed for most of their adult lives a very difficult set of economic and as a downstream cultural circumstances that have made life for us very hard. We did not get the world we were promised when we were kids. And there's a variety of factors to that. Some of them are policy decisions, some of them are state of the world decisions, sort of thing. But we did not get the world that we were promised. And it's had, even for those that are doing well, it's had devastating circumstances. New number just came out. Millennials today are making 20% less than their parents. That's the difference between buying a house or not. That's the difference between whether your kids are going to college or not. I mean, that has huge downstream effects economically for everyone.
You've also written a novel called Cast Iron. Without spoiling too much about Cast Iron, what is it about?
It is about a young man named Randy Carruth living in Missouri who kills his stepfather with a cast iron frying pan for molesting his sister and his life afterwards.
You've also written what I believe is a short story collection. It's titled An Unfinished Coloring Book, but I don't think it's actually a coloring book. It's just coloring book as part of the title.
It is
What's
just part of the title. There's no coloring inside.
okay.
It's just all words. Yes, that's an anthology of me. It is several short stories I put together. I have one about the opioid crisis, one about the housing crisis in California, and everyone's favorite story in that collection is one called The Ticket, about a man who finds he's won $50,000 on a scratcher and has to turn it in by 5 o'clock that day. There's only one problem. He has to turn it in Olympia, but he's in Seattle. And it's his adventure trying to get to Olympia to turn the ticket in on time.
What motivated you to write each of your books?
Well, Cast Iron is loosely based on a story I was told by someone I worked with in the food industry when I was 19 years old. And he and I were sitting in his basement, hanging out. I was the head of catering for this barbecue joint, and he was my helper. A gopher. Get me this, go for that, lift that, carry this. Um, and he told me kind of the basic outline of this story, and I just kind of kept it with me for years and years. And I always wanted to write it because I thought it was interesting and fascinating. A big part of my fiction writing philosophy is sort of the drama of the everyday moment. And so I just kept that story with me until 2013. And I started to write it. And then I released that book in January of 2020. Not a great time to release a new book. The short story collection came out in March of 2020, also a terrible time to release a book. But yeah, that I kind of kept that. I'd always been a writer and a storyteller from when I was very young. Um, and I had a lot of ideas and things in my head, but I didn't necessarily know how to express them all. And that I took Cast Iron was the book that I learned to tell stories in. Really. There were several different drafts of it, several different versions before I settled on the one that you see before you today.
Now, what is regarding your works in fiction, Cast Iron, and then An Unfinished Coloring Book? Is Are there any differences to how you approach writing a novel compared to how do you approach writing short stories? And if so, what are some of them?
Well, some of the differences are quite obvious. One, a novel is a lot longer than a short story. Although I will say many of the great novelists were also great short story writers. Um, Bringing a short story together takes a lot of discipline because you really have to focus on mm, a moment or an hour. A novel will go on for days. Cast Iron takes place over several years. A short story, you have really to capture a moment sort of thing. And so that's a very unique way of writing, and it's harder to write shorter. It's much easier to kind of go on loquaciously, all this type of thing. It takes real discipline and real planning to write short and give only what's needed. Especially if you're like writing for a contest and with a word count requirement, you really have to be very efficient with your words. And that is a lot harder. Um, than a novel where you can kind of write on loquaciously and leave a lot more in, and you can go over several years and do time jumps and all this type of thing. You don't get a lot of that in a short story.
Now, are all your books published through SOOPmedia slash something or other publishing, or some or all of them published by different methods or by different publishers?
No, so I started out on my own. So I kind of had a weird publishing journey. So I had these books and ideas, and I was doing a lot of submissions, and I just was not getting anywhere. I tend to have a very unique and particular style, as my UK editor puts it. And Cast Iron got some attention from agencies in New York, two different agencies. The problem is the inciting incident happens about halfway through the book, very similar to some other major writers like Jhumpa Lahiri, who wrote The Lowland, and some other books that way. That doesn't necessarily fit with what publishers are looking for. So after both agencies requested full manuscript and turned me down, I went the self-publishing route. So Cast Iron and an unfinished coloring book were published by myself. I did both the covers. That photo on the cover of Cast Iron is a pan that I found at the place where I was living in West Virginia. The hand is from my neighbor downstairs, and who worked in construction, had the perfect hands for it. And then an unfinished coloring book is a graphic cover that I did on my own. And then I hired editors and I released them myself through Ingram Spark. And then when I joined Soup in 2023, we moved them over into the Soup library. So it still says Widgery Omni Media on the spine, but it's Soup Library. And then America's Lost Generation is fully with something or other publishing.
Do you plan on or are you considering writing more books? And if so, what are some ideas you have in mind for books that you will or may write at some point in the future?
Oh, I've always been a multi-project writer. Um, I did my next fiction book will be a historic fiction called The Sweetgrass Saga. I wrote that project in grad school, and I got my MFA from Goddard College in creative writing. If we had cameras on, you would see it sitting in the document box above my right shoulder. Um, and that'll be my next fiction book. It takes place in the antebellum South. It's kind of like Downton Abbey. It's a very upstairs downstairs between the white family and the African American enslaved persons who serve them by force. So, and it's based on the plantation that my family comes from in north central Mississippi.
Your website, which I'm going to include a link to in the text description of the episode once it's uploaded, is the Cameron Journal, and you write about political and other topics there. What
Yeah.
types of articles do you write on the Cameron Journal?
Yeah. On the Cameron Journal, we have a little bit of everything. So I do a lot of political and cultural commentary. I have wonderful contributors that cover a lot of other topics I have no interest in, like health and wellness and housing and stuff. And I also do a lot of articles for business owners and navigating business trends and all this type of thing. So I do politics, culture, business, and business trends. That's kind of the content you'll see on there. The best way to get it sent to you directly is to sign up for the newsletter every Saturday. I send out a newsletter with kind of a wrap up of the week's headlines, the stories I'm following, and you also get links to the best articles of the week and the Cameron Joel News Hour, which airs every Sunday, and my podcast interview, which comes out once a week as well.
You also host the Cameron Journal podcast. I'll also include a link to that in the text description of the episode once it's uploaded. But what can listeners expect from a typical episode of your podcast?
Yeah, so on the Cameron Journal podcast, I interview all sorts of people, but a lot of politics, a lot of book authors. So if you want to hear about new fiction, especially self-published fiction, this type of thing, you won't honestly do a lot better. There's only a handful of podcasts that cover books the way I do. And so, yeah, you'll get a little bit of politics, a little bit of culture, fiction authors. This week we had on Dr. Jamar Montgomery. He is a political and policy advocate. And he and I talk about the Trump administration, the Kamala Harris campaign, its heavy politics. The week before, I had on a dentist talking about the problems with American dental care. We're having conversations on healthcare. We're having conversations on culture. Jack Kammer, who I think was the week beforehand as well. He and I were talking about men, manhood, and masculinity, which I love to talk about because I was a contributor to the Good Men Project for years and years. So yeah, we're really kind of discussing a little bit of everything, but it tends to be in kind of like the Cameron Journal, politics, cultural commentary, and then also interviews with real authors about their books, which sometimes that can drag us into a whole variety of topics ranging from sex and romance and fantasy books to domestic violence and everything in between. So
I'm going to ask you a political question to uh, finish out this interview. And by the time I get this episode uploaded, this might be kind of an obsolete question. But
yeah.
what are your thoughts about President Donald Trump's tariffs and how they've impacted the economy and the stock market, especially so far?
Well, I guarantee, given what's going on, this question will still be salient by the time you upload this episode. The tariff regime, I wrote a long piece at brains.com about this, where I looked at some remarks that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had made in regards to the tariff regime. They're trying to achieve a couple things. One is to reset the global economy, which hitherto has been predicated on we run a trade deficit, everyone else runs trade surpluses, therefore we import more than we export. They're trying to restructure that. And that's the first thing they're trying to do. The second thing they're trying to do is they're trying to devalue the dollar. One of the downsides of having the world's reserve currency is that there's a lot of demand for it, which means our currency stays expensive, which means our exports are by their very nature very uncompetitive. You can have it done cheaper, faster elsewhere. They're trying to divide the dollar to make American exports more attractive and turn us more towards an export economy, which we don't really need to be, but at least an export economy in goods. Everyone forgets that we run a trade surplus in services, software, social media, support services for technology, all this sort of thing. We run huge trade surpluses in services. And the third thing they're trying to do, which takes a long time and a lot of capital investment, is they're trying to reshore manufacturing to American shores. In so much as I'm sure everybody knows, and I actually touch on this a little bit in America's Lost Generation, is we've had kind of a hollowing out of the middle of the country. A lot of the simple manufacturing jobs that our parents and grandparents had left in the 80s and 90s and haven't been seen since. And that's also something that they're definitely trying to fix is to encourage domestic manufacturing. The problem with that is the cost of American labor is very high, and that makes us having a large manufacturing base rather difficult. Our domestic consumption will only take us so far. And to export is very difficult because we're undercut on labor by literally anywhere else in the world except Europe and only parts of Europe. So they're trying to kind of undo the globalization we've had in multiple forms since about 1993, which has been wonderful for China, wonderful for developing the rest of the world, has been a net loser for working Americans. If you live in a small town in Ohio that used to have a steel plant, your steel plant is rusting and falling down, has probably been torn down and turned into a Superfund site. And you're struggling to find a job, and you might be addicted to opioids or whatever have you. I mean, there's kind of been a big social contagion from the fact that our economic growth for the last at least 25 years has primarily happened in about a dozen cities, usually on the coast, and in a handful of professions which usually require education. So you've ended up with a country where non-educated, particularly non-educated whites, have been economically socked in the jowl, and educated everyone has made a lot of money. And that's a problem the Trump administration is trying to fix. That's a big part of their base, and they're trying to reorder the entire global trading system to start to begin to fix that problem. Tariffs are the dumbest way to do that, though. You could have achieved the same goal with higher taxes on corporations. Trump tends to lower those. They want to lower them again. You also could solve that problem with investments in education, R&D, and incentivizing companies to move data centers, laboratories, and other things into the middle of the country. You see this a lot with how North Carolina has done their research triangle around the University of North Carolina and the wonderful technology and R&D situation they've created in central North Carolina. That's an example of how to kind of revitalize your economy with the industries that we have today, not the industries we used to have. I also think the administration forgets that modern manufacturing, which we actually still make a lot of stuff in this country, it's just not toasters and vacuum cleaners and microwaves. We make a lot of stuff in this country. Modern manufacturing is highly automated. The days of 6,000 people showing up to a building and doing work are over. Those days are never coming back. And even for the places that do make stuff, it's very sophisticated. You have to have at least a 2-year associates to be able to run these things. You have to understand coding and CAD and a bunch of things to do this. It's not, show up with a high school diploma or less and turn a wrench and get paid well for doing it. Those days are gone. Even China's not doing that anymore. So, they're trying to use tariffs to fix a number of economic and social ills in the country. And the real solution is a better tax regime, investments in education, and investments in social programs. That's what would really move things forward for people. Instead, the entire global trading system is getting torn down because people in the middle of this country were left behind.
You explained that uh, 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 the rationale behind the Trump tariffs from Trump's people, and then how dumb the way they're going about fixing that problem is better than anyone I've seen on cable news.
Actually, it's funny you should say that because when I wrote that long form article for Brains Magazine, I sent it around to a journalist friend of mine who I'll be seeing later this evening in California. And he said, I wish that the Trump administration was being as logical about their policy as your analysis of it. It's like you've got it more together than they do. Yeah, it's the problem is people don't listen to what is actually being said. Unlike Trump, Scott Bessent is a player in the game. He is a banker, he is an economist, he has a vision for the new American economy. And if you actually listen to what he says, he has a very articulate vision. If you listen to Trump, you're listening to oatmeal. If you listen to the Treasury Secretary, he has an articulate message. And so what I have done is listen to the Treasury Secretary and knowing what I know about these things, because I have a master's degree in international relations, have analyzed and understood, okay, here's what you're trying to do. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think there's a better way to do it. And 3 successive presidential administrations have not done it, but I get what they're trying to do. Also, I don't go for great sound clips like they do on cable news. That's something that you'll find in all my products, all my writing, the news hour, the podcast, is I'm not always going for a great clip. I'm trying to leave you empowered with information so you can go out and make great decisions in your life.
Cameron, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing and insightful guest, and I wish you a safe and happy birthday.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It was amazing to interview Cameron. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.